surfacing numbers of people who are sleeping on Victoria Street pavements, I reflected that this government is the first since the 1920s that has presided over a real terms fall in average wages for its people. Is this record of failure really the best that this Prime Minister can offer to the United Kingdom?
What we've actually seen under this government is a record fall in the number of unemployed people over the last year. Also, he might want to make reference to the fact that this morning the Office of National Statistics has produced the figures to show the number of workless households going down by 671,000 in our country. The number of children growing up in a home where nobody works is down by 387,000. What that means is all those children growing up seeing one of their parents going out to work, putting food on the table, providing for that family, providing a role model for that children. That's a record to be proud of.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nicola Sturgeon this morning has called for a separate majority for Scotland in the event of a EU referendum, which is a reserved matter in respect of the Scotland Act. Will the Prime Minister refuse her request or demand, and will he also condemn the Liberal Democrats for what appears to be a veto over our referendum bill? Could he get this right?
What I say to my honourable friend is, we are one united kingdom. There will be one in-out referendum, and that will be decided on a majority of those who vote. That is how the rules should work. I'm very disappointed that we won't be able to take forward the referendum bill in this Parliament. It wasn't possible to get agreement on a money resolution, but people should be in no doubt. If they want an in-out referendum, there is only one way to get it, and that is to return a Conservative government.
Mr. Speaker, a vital tool that has helped to bring murderers, rapists and paedophiles to justice is a European arrest warrant. Why is he delaying having a vote on it?
I'm not delaying having a vote on it. There will be a vote on it. We need, in order to have a vote on it, the small matter of a negotiation to take place within Europe, which up to now the Spanish have been blocking. I think the Spanish will shortly remove their block, and at that moment we'll be able to have a vote.
We all know the reason why he's not having a vote. It's the by-election. It's the by-election. It's the by-election in Rochester and Stroud. He's paralysed by fear of another backbench rebellion on Europe. So I want to make an offer to him. We've got a Labour opposition day next week. We'll give him the time for a vote on the European arrest warrant, and we'll help him get it through.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one problem with his second question, which is we are going to have a vote. We're going to have it for the Rochester by-election. His questions have just collapsed.
Mr. Speaker, all I can say is I look forward to us walking through the lobby together to vote for the European arrest warrant, two parties working together in the national interest. Or maybe, Mr. Speaker, given his backbenchers, 1.5 parties working together in the national interest. Now, turning from Home Office dithering to Home Office incompetence, can the Prime Minister explain why the number of asylum applicants awaiting a decision has risen by 70% in the last year?
First of all, let me just add some detail to the vote on the European arrest warrant, because this is an important issue. What we have achieved with the Justice and Home Affairs opt-out is the biggest transfer of power from Brussels back to Britain, as we have opted out of over 100 measures. But it is important that we take action to keep Britain safe, particularly from serious criminals and terrorists, and the European arrest warrant offers the best way of doing that. And I would stress to those who are concerned about this, the European arrest warrant is very different from the arrest warrant first introduced under the last Labour government. You cannot now be extradited for something that isn't a crime in Britain. Judges are able to reject European arrest warrants, and they've done so in many, many cases. And you can't be extradited if there's going to be a long period of detention. These are all important considerations. But I'm sure he's looking forward to walking through the lobbies with somebody, Mr. Speaker, because he's had rather a lonely week with the loss of his leader in Scotland, a total shambles in Yorkshire, and all the other problems that he's got. Now, the next question I think was about asylum and immigration. Let me just say this. We inherited from Labour a complete and utter shambles. A department that wasn't fit for purpose, computer programs that wouldn't work, and an immigration system that was a complete mess. And before he asks his next question, he might want to apologise for the mess that Labour made.
On this day of all days, there's only one person who should be apologising on immigration, and it's him for his total failure. And he's not putting it right, he's making it worse. Since 2010, the backlog has gone up, not down. They've wasted £1 billion on failed IT projects, and they've lost track of 50,000 people. And what was his promise, Mr. Speaker, before the election? He said he would reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. What is net migration now?
Net migration is down a quarter from its peak under Labour. And net migration from outside the European Union is down to its lowest level since 1998. But he talks about records. I'm happy to contrast our record any time. Under Labour, net migration quadrupled. 2.5 million extra people came into our country. In 2004, they gave unrestricted access to our labour markets to 8 new European countries. He forgot to mention immigration in his conference speech altogether. And of course, there is that remark by Peter Mandelson that admits the last Labour government sent out search parties to look for extra migrants to bring to this country. I ask him again, get up and apologise for your record.
He couldn't tell us the figure. He made the promise of tens of thousands, and it is 243,000. Now he published his contract with the British people at the election on immigration, and he said this: if we don't deliver our side of the bargain, vote us out in 5 years' time. Why doesn't he just own up? He has broken his promise.
We have cut immigration from outside the EU by 1/3. We've closed down 700 bogus colleges. We've introduced new rules on benefits. But all of this clearing up a shocking shambles and mess left by the last Labour government. Will he just accept one issue? In 2004, the decision to allow every single new member state to come to Britain was a catastrophically bad decision. We opposed it at the time, and I ask him again, will you apologise for that appalling decision?
He's been Prime Minister for 4.5 years, and it has got worse, not better. And Mr. Speaker, on immigration, this government combines callousness with incompetence. They don't show basic humanity and say rescuing drowning people is a pull factor for immigration, but they're so incompetent they can't deliver their basic promises. Why didn't he just admit it? On immigration, he has failed.
On immigration, we inherited the biggest mess this country has ever seen. Immigration from outside the EU down, benefits restricted, proper rules when new members join the European Union. All of that clearing up the mess made by Labour. And what we heard today, not a single word of apology from a party that sent out search parties to look for more migrants. The British people know we are making every effort to control migration. They know he'd make no effort at all because he's got no leadership.
Mr. Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister wants his EU referendum bill to proceed as he claims that he does, then all he needs to do is to demonstrate a level of mature engagement on the granting of money resolutions. Is the Prime Minister proud of the fact that his party is abusing the privilege of executive power and denying the clear will of this House by denying that the money resolution for the private member's bill to protect the vulnerable and disabled from the bedroom tax?
I'm afraid the problem with my right honourable friend's point is that his bill is literally a bill. It would cost over £1 billion for the British taxpayer, and that's why it wouldn't be right to give it a money resolution. But if the honourable gentleman believed in democracy, he would recognise that the EU referendum bill passed this House with a massive majority. It went into the House of Lords. We should reintroduce it as a government bill. That's what ought to happen.
Kelvin Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tax gap has been calculated at a massive £119.3 billion, even a quarter of which would transform public finances. Yet the government has chosen to cut HMRC staffing by over 11,000 since 2010 and utterly failed to close that tax gap. Instead, the government is squeezing the poor and cutting the real wages of millions of low-paid workers. Is the government simply protecting their fat cat billionaire pals from paying their taxes?
Well, let me tell you what is actually happening. Tell him what is actually happening in terms of taxation is that we've taken 3 million of the lowest paid people out of tax altogether, and the fact that is less work for HMRC is welcome. But if you look at the top 1% of taxpayers, they're paying 27% of all income tax, a higher percentage than ever happened under the last Labour government.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the preposterous demand for more British money for Brussels is a small part of a much bigger picture. The big picture is that the Eurozone is failing and threatening global financial stability. Countries in the Eurozone have higher unemployment, lower growth and a higher risk of deflation. Why should Britain be paying for the failures of the Eurozone? And doesn't he agree that the denial of European leaders of the reality of the Eurozone is turning it into the European economic horror version of the Emperor's New Clothes?
Well, I think my right honourable friend makes an important point, which is there is a risk that the Eurozone could go into its third recession in just 6 years when you see how low growth rates are at the moment. And obviously we're not immune from that. And so one of the problems that we have, whether it is about the EU budget or indeed about the issue of migration, is that we're the victims of the success of our economy and its growth in comparison with the Eurozone. Just on the issue of the £1.7 billion bill, I think it is worth recalling what the Dutch finance minister said in an interview yesterday. He said, "I must be able to defend it in front of the Dutch people and Parliament. As long as I can't see the numbers, I can't defend it, and then I won't pay before December the 1st. I think he's right.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, I am sure that the Prime Minister cares about families, and particularly families under stress, under great stress. But is he aware that up and down our country there are stressed families with a challenged or challenging child that cannot obtain any help from mental health services? And in 2/3 of our country, research that I have conducted shows that the access is not there, not in 3 months, not in 6 months, not in a year. What can we together do something to stop this dreadful system?
Now, I do agree with the honourable gentleman about the importance of mental health services. We have taken some important steps forward, for instance, giving parity of esteem with mental health in the NHS Constitution, and recently announced additional money and additional waiting time targets for mental health services. And we all know from our constituency surgeries how many people are in need of these services that may actually help them and prevent there being further pressures on the NHS if those services are given.
John Glenn.
Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware of the outstanding work done to combat Ebola at Porton Down in my constituency. However, Public Health England have refused to fully evaluate an option to create a UK Centre for Global Response to Infectious Diseases at Porton, and are instead persisting with their recommendation to move many of these key scientists away elsewhere. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss this matter and ensure that the future of public health, the life sciences industry and the taxpayer are well served by the decision ultimately made for Public Health England?
Well, first of all, let me, through my honourable friend, thank everyone who works at Porton Down for the vital work they do on these sorts of diseases, and indeed the work they're doing on testing for Ebola, because it is we need brave and courageous people to carry out this work. In terms of the meeting he wants, the Health Secretary sitting next to me has said he's very happy to meet with him to discuss in detail this issue. We do want to see life sciences and these areas succeed in Britain, and I know Porton Down's got an important role to play.
Mr. Ian Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've held a dozen public meetings on immigration over the last few weeks, and it's absolutely clear that people in Dudley don't think it's fair that people should be able to come to the UK to be unemployed. They don't think people should be able to claim benefits as soon as they arrive, or as he proposes, after a few short months. They think that people should have to work and contribute and pay into the system first, and they certainly don't think it's fair that people should be able to claim child benefit for children living abroad. When will he be able to sort these things out?
I don't want to be uncharitable to the honourable gentleman who put his question in a reasonable way, but I long remember the years when he sat behind the member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath as his PPS, and I don't think he seemed to whisper any of those things into his ear. I absolutely think he whispered quite a lot of other things into his ear, by the way. I absolutely think we need to deal with this issue about sending benefits home, and we will. We've already lengthened the amount of time that people have to be here before they claim benefits, and we want to go further on that. But we have to be frank about this. The British people are our boss. They want this issue sorted. And it's not simply about people coming to claim or coming to abuse the system. It's the pressure on our health system, on our education system, on our schools and communities. They want it addressed, and they know with this party we will address it.
Tessa Muntz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister very much for meeting Lawrence Dallaglio and me to discuss the lack of innovative radiotherapy, and I welcome his help in trying to solve the problem. But is the Prime Minister aware that NHS England overspent the Cancer Drugs Fund by £30 million last year, and it's taken that money from the radiotherapy budget? Can I ask him to look into this and get NHS England to put that money back into radiotherapy?
Well, I very much enjoyed my meeting with her and with Lawrence Dallaglio, who I think is doing excellent work on particularly these more innovative radiotherapy treatments that should become more widespread. And I think the case that he makes is extremely powerful. In terms of the overspend on the cancer drugs budget, that is not some sort of maladministration. That is because more cancer victims want more drugs, and under this government they're getting those drugs. And that's not disadvantaging other parts of the health service. But I'll look very carefully at what she said and make sure these treatments go ahead.
Mr. Elfyn Llwyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister said that the Barnett formula is here to stay, is it not high time now to give Wales parity of funding with our friends in Scotland? And once and for all, give fair funding to Wales?
Well, I said what I said about the Barnett formula, and I won't go away from that. I think what we need to see in Wales is a real debate now about what I would say is a double yes. Yes to another referendum on tax-raising powers, and yes to those powers, so that the Welsh Assembly takes greater responsibility for raising and spending more of its own money. I think that is the right pathway.
Lynn Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because there has never been a major hospital in Montgomeryshire, my Welsh constituents have always accessed treatment in England. They have to wait a minimum of 26 weeks for treatment. Their close neighbours living over the border wait a maximum of only 18 weeks. Does the Prime Minister think that's fair?
Well, I know that there are some real issues of fairness here, and there are many more patients travelling from Wales to England than there are from England to Wales. And of course, the waiting times are quite different. If you take the typical average waiting list for things like hip replacements, you wait typically 70 days in England, but you wait 170 days in Wales. And I think this isn't right. And frankly, the opposition can't have it both ways. They want to blame the politicians in England for the NHS, but they take absolutely no blame for the appalling state of the NHS in Wales.
Hazel Blair's.
Mr. Speaker, this week Jamshed Javid, a young science teacher from Bolton, a husband and a father, has pleaded guilty to serious terrorist offences. Like hundreds of others, he's been radicalised by a poisonous ideology. The Home Secretary promised in her conference speech to make prevent a statutory duty on all public sector organisations, and she promised a counter-extremism strategy that would tackle all forms of extremism. When will the Prime Minister take action and make the resources available necessary to implement that promise?
Well, as the Right Honourable Lady knows, I have great sympathy with her views. I think there's cross-party agreement between at least me and her about the importance of combating not just violent extremism, but all forms of extremism. She'll be delighted to know that the Home Office is drawing up this strategy, and we had our first discussion of it in the Extremism Task Force. Progress is good, and we also do want, as she said, to put these arrangements on a statutory footing. There may be opportunities in the anti-terrorism legislation that will be coming before the House, and I want us to make progress on all of these issues.
Mr David Amis.
Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the field of poppies at the Tower of London is a stunning and deeply moving way of honouring all those who lost their lives in the First World War? And would he also agree with me that it serves as a timely reminder that in any conflict there can be a terrible loss of human life?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is a stunning display, and it's extremely poignant, and I think reminds people of how many people gave their lives, not just in that conflict, although obviously the slaughter was horrendous, but also in so many conflicts since then, where our armed services personnel have been defending our freedoms and our way of life. And perhaps it's particularly poignant in this week when we think about the final troops returning from Afghanistan. We think of the 453 servicemen and women who were lost, and we also think of the many hundreds who are going to be living with life-changing injuries that we must make sure we look after for the rest of their lives.
Heidi Alexander.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week, A&E figures showed that the 4-hour waiting time target has been missed for the 65th week in a row. Does the Prime Minister honestly think this is acceptable?
Of course, we want to meet the A&E targets every week of the year, and that is our aim, and that is why we put in 12.7 billion extra in terms of the NHS. And if you look at accident and emergency, there are 800 more A&E doctors working in our emergency departments than there were when I became Prime Minister. But one of the pressures we face is 1.3 million more patients every year going into accident and emergency. So to deal with this, what we need to do, well, a lot of shouts of why from across the other side, they might start with their own GP contract. They might think about that. So what we need to do is enhance GP services, put the resources into A&E, improve public health, help with our frail elderly, all the things set out in Simon Stevens's excellent plan that needs to be backed by the money and the successful economy that this government's delivering.
Sir Bob Russell.
More people live in Essex than voted yes in the Scottish referendum. With fairness needed for citizens in all parts of the United Kingdom, will the Prime Minister agree that what Scotland gets, so should the people of Essex and East Anglia?
Quite right. Well, I know this is becoming something of a theme in my honourable friend's questions. I think the best answer I can give him is that if we are, and I believe we should, keep all our promises to the people of Scotland in terms of additional powers to the Scottish Parliament, including powers over tax-raising powers, then we must make sure that members of Parliament for Essex, or indeed other counties in towns in England, have the ability to vote on these issues as they affect England in this House. Now, my concern is that the Labour Party seems to have completely given up on this issue. They are happy to have an all-party agreement when it comes to Scottish powers. They're happy to have an all-party agreement when it comes to Welsh powers. But for some reason, when it comes to England, they've got absolutely nothing to say.
Kate Hoey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Prime Minister explain why in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales it's been possible to reach a settlement with the Fire Brigade Union on the question of pensions and early retirement, yet in England, where the new minister was having constructive discussions last week, somebody above her said no, no more, and now we face a 4-day strike. Would the Prime Minister intervene, take some common sense, get the FBU round the table and sort this, because it could be sorted tomorrow?
Well, I hope that the Honourable Lady is right, that it could be sorted tomorrow, because I think everyone wants to see this sorted out. I'm sure, like many other members, we've all met members of the Fire Brigade Union in our constituency surgeries and listened to their arguments. But this does, in the end, have to be settled by the employers and by the trade union, and I know that the Minister will listen very carefully to what she said.
Richard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware of Shropshire's economic success? Over the last few months, we've seen more jobs created in the county than ever before. In fact, since the last Labour government left office, we've seen a dramatic fall of up to 46% of people claiming job seekers allowance. In fact, today we have the lowest unemployment record ever in the county and in the Wrekin parliamentary constituency of just 1.9%. Isn't this more evidence that the government's long-term economic plan is working?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend to bring this to the House's attention. I mean, the fact is the claimant count in his constituency of the Wrekin is down by 40% in the last year alone. We've now got 2 million more people employed in the private sector since the election. As I said at the outset of Prime Minister's questions, these figures for the fall in number of workless households, homes where no one has been working, including those homes with children, this is not just a statistically important fact, it is actually a socially and morally important fact that children are going to grow up in homes where someone is working. Also, if we look at lone parent employment, actually the lone parent employment rate has gone up as well. Now, I know Labour Party don't want to hear good news, but the fact is, because our long-term economic plan is working, we're getting the British people back to work.
Jim Shannon.
Prime Minister, I know that you, like myself and my party, the Democratic Unionist Party, are fully committed to the full implementation of the military covenant. Why has government failed to keep records of all those 30,000 personnel who served in Afghanistan and returned to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and came back with injuries? Injuries that should have been given priority for treatment under the military covenant. Can the Prime Minister confirm what steps he will take to rectify that situation?
Well, as the honourable gentleman knows, we want to see the military covenant honoured properly in every part of the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland, and I'm happy to help with that. On the issue of how we keep in touch with veterans, I think we have actually made some breakthroughs. The Veterans Information Service now contacts all those who've been discharged from the armed forces a year after they've left. This was something that was set out by my honourable friend, the member for West Wiltshire, in his report. We're copying from the best countries around the world about how we help our veterans, and because we're taking the LIBOR funds, multi-million-pound funds from the city, and putting them into veterans' charities, there's real money to support our veterans.
Barclay.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with senior US officials who said last week that Qatar is still a permissive jurisdiction for terrorist finance? And will he press the Emir and report back to the House on what action is being taken within Qatar and those individuals named on the UK sanctions list?
Well, I'll be talking to the Emir very shortly, and of course we'll discuss all of these issues, particularly in terms of how we can work together to combat extremism. One of the things in Qatar recently, they have introduced a new act to make sure that charities aren't abusing charitable status and giving money to inappropriate organisations, and we'll want to make sure this is working properly. But I commend my honourable friend for his persistence on this issue. It really does matter that we work with all our allies to make sure that extremist and terrorist groups aren't getting the support that they seem to be.
Dan Jarvis.
Research published this week shows that there are now more than 5 million workers stuck in low-paid jobs. Women's wages are lower now than they were a year ago, and the gender pay gap is rising. We've been clear on this side about how we would strengthen the national minimum wage. What's the Prime Minister going to do to make work pay?
Nothing.
What I'd say to the honourable gentleman, what we need is we need more jobs, which we're getting. We need to see the minimum wage increase, which it just has, and then we need to lift people out of tax by raising the tax threshold, and we're doing all three of those things. On the minimum wage, we've just seen it go up to £6.50. What I see from the Labour Party's plans is a plan to put it up to £8 by 2020. But if you make reasonable assumptions about rates of inflation, it will actually get past that level by 2020. So Labour, these geniuses on the opposition front bench, they thought all summer about what would be a really good plan to help people, and they've decided to cut the minimum wage. No wonder they're melting down in Scotland. They got a crisis in South Yorkshire. Nobody trusts the Shadow Chancellor. Nobody believes the leader. It's the same old Labour and complete and utter shower.
Mr. Speaker, at 3:30 this afternoon, 120 members of the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary will march through carriage gates down to the north door of north door of Westminster Hall in commemoration of all they've done for this nation in Afghanistan and across the globe. Will the Prime Minister, indeed other members of both houses and staff throughout the palace, find time to join me at the great north door of Westminster Hall to thank them for all they've done?
Well, I will certainly encourage all honourable members to do this, and I will examine my own diary and see if there is any chance that I could come along too. I think we should take every opportunity to thank our armed services personnel, particularly for what they have done in Afghanistan. 14 long years we have served. Many people have been once, twice, or even on 3 different tours, and they deserve our thanks, our congratulations for their service and their courage.
Margaret Beckett.
Last week, the Prime Minister was asked why 16 health organisations, doctors, nurses, patients, say that health and social care services in England, that's the bit he's responsible for, are at breaking point. And he made a lot of allegations about the position in Wales. Can we now have an English answer to an English question?
What I would say to the honourable lady is, of course, there are pressures in the NHS, but I think it is worth listening to the new Chief Executive of National Health England, someone who worked for the Labour Party when they were in government, who said this: over the past 5 years, the NHS has been remarkably successful. We're treating millions more patients than 5 years ago. The NHS has become some 20 billion more efficient, and those are things that we should recognise. Now, of course, there are pressures, but what we need, and Simon Stevens says this very clearly, is we need to see improved efficiency. We need to make sure we get rid of unnecessary demand for the NHS by investing in public health. And yes, money is required, but as Simon Stevens puts it, you only get more money if you have a successful economy. As he said, a tax-funded health service requires a healthy UK economy. Well, we've got a healthy UK economy, and we will have a strong NHS.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent Taxpayers Alliance study revealed that the amount of taxpayers' money that is being spent on union office space is the equivalent of £27.4 million at a London market value, or equivalent square footage of the size of the Kremlin. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that there's time for further political funding reform?
Well, I think it is necessary to cap the donations that unions make to parties, and that should be introduced. But I think he comes up with an ingenious idea. If trade unions have got so much extra space, maybe they should do what the government is doing and make additional space available to entrepreneurs, so we can have more start-ups, more enterprise. That's a contribution the trade unions could make.
Jen Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I tell the Prime Minister that sadly my constituent, better known as Boomer, Port Vale Football Club's beloved mascot, had a stroke last week. He was discharged home only to be told that he could face an 8-week wait for urgent speech and language therapy. So can the Prime Minister set out how this government will ensure that there are community stroke specialist speech and language teams giving the right community care support from day one, both in Stoke-on-Trent and in England?
No, I think the honourable lady is absolutely right that we need to do better in terms of treating the consequences of a stroke. I think the NHS has made some very big improvements about diagnosing and treating stroke victims as it happens, and we've seen that with better arrangements for taking people to hospitals that have that expertise. But I think what's now required is more effort really to look at how you can make someone who's had a stroke have a better quality of life. More money is going into that, more research and effort is being done, and I'm very happy to look at her particular case.
Order. Point of order, Mr. John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, following the failure of the European Union referendum bill, because the Labour and Liberal leaderships will not trust the British electorate on this issue, what guidance can you give with regards to how to best proceed, given there is no money resolution?
What I have to say to the honourable gentleman, for me to offer guidance on that matter, procedural matters relating to bills which have been committed to public bill committees are matters exclusively within the competence of the chair of the said committee. Moreover, as I rather imagine the honourable gentleman knows, but I emphasise for the awareness more widely of members of the House, money resolutions are exclusively a matter for the government. Those are waters in which the Speaker does not tread. Point of order, Mr. John Mann. Well, actually, if the honourable gentleman will forgive me, I think I'll take the point of order from Mr. Andrew George first, and then I'll come to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. As a further point of order, in respect of the provision and tabling of money resolutions, and further to your advice just a moment ago, Mr. Speaker, can you please let the House know on what previous occasions there have been circumstances where the will of this House has clearly demonstrated at the second reading of a private member's bill a desire to proceed with that bill, and has been frustrated by an executive that is clearly abusing the privilege of its executive power in the way that it is with the private member's bill on the affordable homes?
Wish any discourtesy to the honourable gentleman, but it's not for the chair either to be subject to or the purveyor of a history lesson on these matters. What I would say to the honourable gentleman, who's nothing if not an eager beaver, is that he should consult the Journal Office, and I think that he will go away, as a result of so doing, significantly better informed. We'll leave it there for now. I don't think well, I will come to the honourable gentleman, but I'm saving him up. A point of order, Mr. John Mann.
Mr. Speaker, following the most violent and vitriolic abuse using Twitter of my friend, the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree, an individual was jailed for 4 weeks. Despite this, or perhaps in spite of it, the abuse has worsened and deepened on precisely the same issue in the same violent way. If the medium that was used was a newspaper, I'm quite certain that the House would demand that the editor be dragged to the bar of the House and forced to explain him or herself. What advice would Mr. Speaker give to how to handle the internet, and specifically Twitter, which is the medium by which this abuse against one of the members of this House is continuing on a most violent and daily basis?
To the honourable gentleman for his point of order, my immediate reaction is twofold. First, where a crime has been committed, and the honourable gentleman referenced at the outset of his point of order the fact of a crime and indeed of a conviction, that is a matter for the police and the prosecuting authorities. Secondly, and more widely, insofar as the honourable gentleman has referenced an outrageous instance or series of instances of anti-Semitic abuse, I think that the whole House would be united in concluding that that behaviour was both despicable and beneath contempt. And although I wouldn't ordinarily seek to personalise such matters, as the honourable gentleman referred to his honourable friend, the member for Liverpool